I want to thank the organizers of this international conference for the invitation to speak today and for the hard work they have put into its planning. I know that organizing a conference like this is a great deal of work and they've done a wonderful job. I also want to thank you for the introduction to my talk today. Today I will speak about Armenia as a global leader in genocide prevention. In doing this, I will be speaking in my capacity as the Executive Director of the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention, and not in my capacity as a historian, although everything we do at the Lemkin Institute is informed by history and historical study. But I make this distinction between my role as a scholar of history and my role as the Executive Director of the Lemkin Institute, because I will be using the past today to make normative, prescriptive statements about Armenia's potential as a positive global thought leader in the 21st century. I realize that I am speaking at a very difficult time for Armenia and Armenians. It is a difficult period geopolitically and also existentially. It is hard to talk about Armenia as a leader in genocide prevention only 6 months after Armenia experienced what many are calling a second Armenian genocide in Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. At the Lemkin Institute, we view the genocide in Artsakh as one of the most total and efficient cases in world history, as Azerbaijan effectively destroyed 100% of the Armenian Artsakhi community on its ancestral lands in a matter of a handful of days. 4,000 years of a distinct civilization erased in a heartbeat. At the Lemkin Institute, we regret this global mistake deeply and are committed to advocating for justice. In fact, the existential issues being faced by Armenia today and by Armenian diaspora communities around the world as well, I'm thinking about in East Jerusalem, but also those diaspora communities who are targeted increasingly by the Grey Wolves terrorist organization. These existential issues are object lessons in the need for long-term genocide prevention within our global community. For example, if the Western world had stayed the course after the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1923 and continued to push for more accountability in Turkey, we may not find Armenia in the situation it is in today. Had the Western world and Russia called attention to the genocidal Armenophobia being nurtured in Azerbaijan for decades, we may not find Armenia in the situation it is in today. In addition to being an object lesson in the need for real prevention in the world, I will propose that Armenia has the civilizational resources as well as the as yet not fully harnessed power to have a bold impact on the way the world treats ancient and indigenous civilizations, small states, and regional minority populations. I will start with a few words about what is called genocide prevention in the world today. We are living in a time when great strides have been made in genocide prevention, but the initiative itself has been a complete and utter failure. We need only to look at Artsakh, at Gaza, at Darfur, at Myanmar, at Ethiopia, Ukraine, and the Xinjiang province in China to see the failure. Last fall, we witnessed the European Union and the United States act in shameless complicity in 2 genocides, one in Artsakh and one in Gaza, because of raw geopolitical concerns. While such complicity is not new, I just returned from a keynote speech in Bangladesh on their Genocide Day, which commemorates the 1971 genocide committed by Pakistan with the full support of the U.S. and the complicity of the United States of America. So while such complicity is not new, the crass openness, the boldness of this complicity is. So I'm standing in front of you at a time of rising global despair, about the state of our Genocide Convention, of our identification and recognition processes, and especially of what we used to call, we don't anymore, but we used to call our genocide prevention protocols, our genocide prevention mechanisms, and our genocide prevention toolboxes. But despite the grim realities of the 21st century and the failure of genocide prevention just in the last year alone, progress in genocide prevention is still real. We now have institutions and knowledge, skills, protocols, and tools that we never had before. We just don't use them. The case law of several special legal tribunals, the creation of the International Criminal Court, the UN's 5-point action plan to prevent genocide, and the development of the doctrine of the responsibility to protect, though weak, have helped establish genocide prevention as an agenda that didn't exist before. The establishment of the positions of the special advisors on the prevention of genocide and the responsibility to protect at the UN, early warning systems, academic programs, museums, specialized scholarship, professional training in genocide prevention. All these steps have created a world aware of the crime and increasingly unified around the goal of its prevention. With the introduction of the Framework of Analysis for Atrocity Crimes by the UN Office of the Special Advisor in 2014, we have gained some clarity in the shared language that we use to talk about it. For the first time in history, we have a third-party state, the state of South Africa, bringing a case of genocide to the International Court of Justice against the genocidal state Israel while the genocide is still ongoing. These are major steps forward indeed. Perhaps the best evidence of progress is the very quick response of global civil society and the global grassroots to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Today, people around the world are arguably even more knowledgeable about genocide and better able to spot it than they were in previous decades. They are certainly more integrated through social media, migration, and global travel. I do feel there is an emerging global consensus against genocide, and it has a much greater potential than ever before to become a coordinated and sustained moral force in the world. But of course, we have to help it along. We must harness it for it to expand. So we cannot underestimate the importance of having a word for this crime, a law against it, and a growing number of people who are knowledgeable about it and willing to fight against it. However, unfortunately, genocide prevention is caught up in real-world structures of power that by their very nature exclude the agency of ordinary human beings, including civil society. These structures include states, of course, especially the big and powerful ones, but also international organizations, economic agendas, and global mechanisms of social control. Particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union and the short period of a unipolar world centered around the United States and NATO, when many people believed that the human rights agenda was on the ascendance, genocide prevention at this time became the global technocrats and legal gatekeepers. Today, many international legal scholars and jurists do not believe that the word genocide should be used outside of a court of law. They seek to gatekeep who can claim it, think about it, utter it, and use it. And this means that we cannot prevent it. Genocide prevention training, to the extent that it exists, is largely an elite-level endeavor, reaching members of government, military officers, and representatives of international agencies, but leaving out the billions of ordinary people around the world who suffer most from genocides and who have the most to gain from preventing the crime. And genocide prevention is an endeavor centered in and coordinated by the Western world, particularly the United States. So of course, genocide prevention reflects the foreign policy agendas of specific hegemons. This is why some cases are called genocide openly by the West, such as Ukraine, and other ones are not, such as Artsakh and Gaza. It is important to remind people that the man who coined the term genocide and pressured the UN to adopt the Genocide Convention, the Polish Jewish lawyer Hraparak-am-ը, viewed the term and the law as a resource for threatened peoples all over the globe. He never meant it to be an elite-level activity. He also never meant for it to become centralized in the global north, as we can see from his many efforts to secure the input and support for the convention from the newly independent states of the global south in the 1940s. So it is a pity that the people of the world have been displaced from the tool that the Genocide Convention was meant to offer them. It is an interesting phenomenon, I think, this reification of the word genocide. It can help explain why 75 years after the Genocide Convention, we still find ourselves grappling with a problem of genocide that is as immediate and as threatening as it was during Lemkin's lifetime. The fact is that we have never really confronted genocide in the first place as a human society. Instead, we have constrained it within a legal realm that ensures that nothing will be done until after genocide has been committed. States like to keep genocide in their back pockets as a legitimate policy choice to use when they think they need to. And therefore, the concept of genocide has been kept narrow and inaccessible. We see that on display today as the United States government leaders try to argue not only that Israel is not committing genocide, but also that Israel is not committing any international crimes at all, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. So this brings me back to the year 2023, the watershed year in the history of genocide, when the states pretending to represent the triumph of human rights and democracy in the world are callously complicit in two devastating and ongoing genocides. Clearly, genocide prevention has the wrong leadership. The Western world is not able to chaperone us through the moral collapse of the international order it built. The West is bogged down in its own moral battles between its darkest phases of fascism and imperialism and its more inspired contributions to mankind. And currently, it unfortunately looks as if the latter, human rights, for example, is losing out, at least in the short term. We hear a lot that the post-World War II rules-based order is dying. And maybe that's true. In fact, the great powers seem dead set on reinventing the new imperialism of the 19th century as they chase after geostrategic and resource corridors all over the world. The regions that are critical to these corridors, the Middle East and North Africa, the South Caucasus, Central Asia, are the new jewels in the crown of empire, and empire is up to its old tricks of destabilization and divide and conquer. As we know, the new imperialism of the 19th century led directly to the First World War. The new imperialism of the 21st may be leading to a third. But things are also different now. Things are not so bleak. And there are openings that we did not have a century and a half ago. For one, we have the Genocide Convention, so it is a bit more difficult for great powers to dispose of entire groups of people without a dramatic global pushback from the grassroots, and as South Africa has so dramatically shown, even from some member states of the UN as well. Furthermore, we have many independent nations, like South Africa, that have histories and memories of past mass atrocity that can act as important obstacles to the perpetration of genocide and complicity in genocide amongst other member states. So South Africa is exerting itself in an incredibly positive way right now. With every new imperialism comes a new decolonization. And we are currently seeing that happening simultaneously. This means that our rapidly changing world is opening up new opportunities for peace and security that we have not seen since World War II. It is a true watershed moment. Armenia's history is tightly bound up in the history of genocide and its prevention. Not only was the Armenian genocide the first modern genocide in Europe, or at least partially in Europe, but also it was the genocide that laid the foundation for the world's modern humanitarian movement. The Armenian genocide was also what inspired Raphael Lemkin to pursue his studies in law and eventually to coin the word genocide and to push for a genocide convention. It was the Armenian genocide that inspired him to do that. In his autobiography, he tells us that it was the assassination of Talat Pasha in Berlin by the genocide survivor Soghomon Tehlirian that led him to ask the fateful question, why is the killing of 1 million people a lesser crime than the killing of an individual? We cannot forget that the Armenian genocide of the Ottoman times influenced Adolf Hitler's thinking about what states can do to their own people, as well as about the impunity that states enjoy when they choose mass killing as a policy. This meant that Raphael Lemkin, who was Jewish, was fighting for the global recognition of a crime he identified as it was taking the lives of his family members. He lost 49 members of his family in the Holocaust. Only one brother survived, and throughout that entire time, he was pushing for this convention to prevent that very crime which took his family. So, Lemkin's life itself was deeply bound up with the fate of Armenians, since that fate became the fate of his own people, only 2 decades after the Armenian genocide. Armenians have had to fight for over 100 years for the recognition of the 1915 to 1923 genocide, and they have done this from places all over the world, here in the South Caucasus, as indigenous people, but also in the massive diaspora as citizens of other nations. They have fought because they know that genocides do not stop until there is accountability that transforms the institutions and ideologies that fuel genocide into institutions and ideologies that can support a sustainable peace. During this fight, Armenians have eschewed particularist approaches and uniqueness arguments about their own suffering. They have actively sought out comparative study and have shared their own tragic past as a form of solidarity with threatened communities across the globe. I have seen this over and over. One of the best examples of this is the creation of the International Day for the commemoration of the dignity of the victims of the crime of genocide and the prevention of this crime, which was recognized by the United Nations in 2015 on the initiative of Armenia and is celebrated every December 9th, the day that the Genocide Convention was signed in 1948. Armenia pushed for this global and universal commemoration as a way to commemorate its own genocide, the 1915 genocide, on its 100th anniversary. Since 2015, Armenia has held 4 global forums against the crime of genocide here in beautiful Yerevan, engaging with academics, NGOs, governments, and UN agencies to advance our genocide prevention knowledge and practical tools. The Armenia mission to the United Nations often collaborates with the UN Office of the Special Advisor on Genocide Prevention to host events that bring attention to pressing issues in international peace and security that affect everyone, such as, for example, online media hate. I have been consistently impressed and moved by the willingness of Armenians to share their status as genocide survivors with others who have experienced similar fates. Armenians therefore have enormous moral authority in the world and global goodwill. This is very rare. Sometimes it may not always feel like this is the case, since the media coverage of events in the South Caucasus is so negligible and lacking, and diplomatic efforts to help Armenia can seem so weak and non-committal. However, this moral authority is real. The moral authority and global goodwill comes from Armenia's efforts to forge a third way, a way not beholden entirely either to the West or to Russia, but one that genuinely reflects Armenia's civilizational crossroads. There are several things that explain Armenia's very close relationship to genocide prevention. Some of these things have to do with Armenia's long history of combating genocidal tendencies amongst their neighbors. There are three important consequences to this, I think. First, Armenians know what genocide is. So many Armenians have family members who experienced the genocide of World War I, or the pogroms in the 1980s, or the recent genocide against Artsakh, or the smaller genocidal massacres that preceded the genocide in the Ottoman Empire, such as the Hamidian massacres and the Adana massacres. Secondly, Armenians continue to be threatened by the genocidal process that began in the Ottoman Empire. Turkey has never been held accountable. It advances Armenophobic arguments and genocide denial with complete impunity, and now it pursues an expansionist pan-Turkic agenda in the Middle East and South Caucasus with little, if any, pushback from the leading powers in the world. All of this directly threatens Armenia and Armenians, and Armenians therefore know a genocidal process and genocidal red flags when they see them, whether these are directed against their own security or against other groups of people. And thirdly, Armenians know how awful it feels to feel abandoned and neglected by the international community, and they appreciate the importance of justice and accountability to any lasting peace, since they have had to fight for so long and had to fight so hard for these things, and since they are still fighting. Armenians therefore understand the need for solidarity and often demonstrate solidarity with other communities and individuals. But the reasons, and I'm coming to a close, the reasons for Armenia's close connection to genocide prevention go further, I believe. I believe Armenia has a very important and special role to play in fostering international peace and security. And this comes from the civilization that has been built here for thousands of years. Armenians are, after all, one of the oldest continuous civilizations in the world. And they therefore know something about how human beings work and how we might live in balance with the people and the world around us. Now, we live, of course, in a world where the value of things like ancient communities are not necessarily recognized. The global order prefers young societies, reckless societies, and the breakneck speed they introduce into social organization. To give birth to this young, fast world of European colonialism, how many millions of indigenous communities were destroyed in the name of development and wealth? And now it is these very characteristics that require a considerable amount of force and violence to sustain, that are threatening to destroy our species as such, as well as the earth on which we live. We see the destruction in climate change and in the genocides that are being pursued by Azerbaijan, Israel, the USA, Sudan, Ethiopia, Myanmar, China, and Russia, to name a few. There are very few societies, even old ones like China, that have avoided the temptation of genocide as a quick solution to difficult problems